Clara Whitfield had come 4 days by train, on the strength of 11 letters and a photograph, and Silas Ward was waiting at the depot when she stepped down with her son's hand in hers. He looked at the boy first, then at her. Then he said, loud enough for the whole platform to hear it, "You didn't write me anything about a child." "You didn't ask," Clara said. "A man asks for a wife, not a wife and someone else's boy." The depot had gone very quiet. A porter stopped mid-stride with a trunk on his shoulder. 2 women near the ticket window stopped pretending not to watch. "He's mine," Clara said. "There's no one else's about it." Silas's mouth twisted like he'd bitten something sour. "I paid for your ticket on the promise of a wife who came without complications. Seems to me you owe somebody a refund." 6-year-old Sam pressed closer to his mother's skirt. Clara put a hand on his shoulder and didn't look away from Silas. "Say what you want about me," she said. Not in front of him. "I'll say what's true," Silas said, and turned to the platform like he wanted witnesses. The letters didn't say widow. They didn't say boy. A man's got a right to know what he's agreeing to. That was when the boots came off the freight wagon across the yard. The man who crossed the platform was built like the work he did broad through the shoulders, sun-marked, unhurried in a way that made the 10 feet between the wagon and the depot look shorter than it was. He stopped between Silas and Clara and looked at Silas with a quiet that had weight behind it. "That's no way to speak to her," he said. "Or to the boy." Silas's chin came up. "This isn't your business, Cole. You made it everybody's business the second you raised your voice on a public platform. No heat in it. Just fact. Whatever you came here to say, you've said it." Silas looked at the size of the man. He looked at the porter, still watching. He looked at Clara once more, the way a man looks at something he's already decided to leave, and settled his hat lower. "Keep her, then," he said, and walked to his wagon, and drove off without looking back. The platform let out its breath. The rancher turned to Clara. He looked at her trunk. He looked at Sam, who was still holding tight to her skirt. He looked at her face, which was holding together by an arrangement she'd made with herself somewhere around the 2nd day of the journey. "You've got people here?" "No," she said. "Not anymore. Not since her first husband died, and there'd been nothing left to keep her in Ohio but the reason she'd left in the first place. Daniel Cole," he said. "Ranch a mile north of town. Got a room that stood empty since my mother passed. Yours till you've worked out what's next." He crouched down to Sam's height, which the boy hadn't expected from a stranger his size. "You like horses?" Sam nodded, still wary. "Good. I've got 6 that need a boy willing to earn their trust." Clara looked at him. Not a polished man, not a gentle-spoken one. A man who'd crossed a train platform because something wrong was happening in front of him, and hadn't needed an introduction first. "I cook," she said, "and I don't take charity easily." Wasn't offering charity. Offering a room and asking for help with a garden that's gotten away from me. He picked up her trunk before she could argue it. "That's a trade, not a favor." They walked off the end of the platform together, and the town set immediately to work, deciding what it meant. The ranch house sat on a rise above a creek, plain and square, with a garden gone to weeds along the south side, and a barn that smelled of hay and leather and hard use. Inside was the order of a man living alone, with a system tools hung by size, a stove blacked and cared for, 2 mismatched chairs at a table built for one. He showed her the room that had been his mother's, a quilt, a washstand, a window facing east. "Sam can bunk in with me till you're settled, if that suits him," Daniel said. "Or there's a cot for the corner of your room if it doesn't." It was, Clara noted, The first time in 3 days anyone had asked what would suit her son, instead of simply deciding, "The corner's fine," she said. That evening the rain came in hard off the ridge, and by the second night she'd found the leak a slow drip, working at the ceiling above Sam's cot, patient as a clock. She said nothing about it. She'd learned, in 11 years of being someone's inconvenient guest, one way or another, that you didn't complain about a roof you hadn't earned the right to complain about yet. Daniel noticed anyway. He always did. 3 days later she came in from the garden to find cedar shingles stacked under canvas on the workbench, and by the end of the week the drip was gone, and neither of them had said a single word about it. That was how the ranch began to run things attended to before they were asked for, and no ceremony made of any of it. Sam took to the horses faster than Clara expected. Daniel taught him the way you'd teach a nephew patient, unhurried, correcting without scolding. "Horses know when you're afraid," he told the boy. "Doesn't mean don't be careful. Means don't let the fear do your deciding for you." Sam repeated that to his mother at supper like it was scripture, and Clara understood, watching her son stand a little straighter, exactly what the words were worth. She earned her keep the way she'd said she would. The garden came back under her hands, beans, squash, a stubborn row of tomatoes Daniel swore wouldn't take this far north, and that she got to take anyway, out of pure refusal to lose an argument with dirt. She turned his thin larder into meals that made him sit a little longer at the table than the food alone required. He never said thank you in words. She stopped needing him to. She learned to read it in the way he set his boots by the door instead of leaving them where they fell, the way he started asking what she needed from town before she had to ask him for the trip. Town, when they went, watched them the way a place watches something it hasn't decided about yet. The storekeeper's wife tallied slow and glanced twice. A woman at the milliner's slowed her step to take stock. Nobody said anything to Clara's face. They didn't need to. She'd had a lifetime's practice reading a room that had already made up its mind. What she hadn't expected was how quickly the town's mind began changing on its own. A month in, the schoolteacher stopped Clara after church to ask if she'd take the younger children 2 mornings a week. She'd heard, from more than one source, that the coal ranch had never looked better cared for, and that counted for something as a reference. Clara said she'd think on it. She took the mornings. The week after, she came home to find the hinge on her door, the one that had stuck since her first night, moving clean and silent, with a curl of shaved metal on the floor, as the only evidence Daniel had touched it. He hadn't mentioned he'd planned to. Some things at the ranch had simply started happening that way. The woodpile restocked itself before she thought to ask. Her water basin was full and warm when she came in from a cold morning at the schoolhouse. These weren't gestures aimed at her. She came to understand they were the ordinary habits of a careful man, widened just enough to include one more person in their reach. She valued that more than she would have valued flowers. On a grey afternoon with weather building over the peaks, she heard a guitar from the porch low, unhurried, a short phrase returning to itself like it was trying to settle something. She dried her hands and went to the doorway. Daniel didn't look up, didn't stop. "Would you play it again from the start?" He did. She sat on the step below him and watched the valley go grey under the coming rain. When the last note faded, neither of them spoke for a while. Later, she asked where the song came from. "My father's," he said, turning the guitar in his hands. "Played it evenings when things sat heavy on him. Learned it after he was gone." He looked at the neck of the instrument like it held more than strings. Keeps the quiet from going the wrong way. She noticed, not long after, the old stitching splitting along the guitar case's seam. One morning while he was out on the range, she sat at the table with her own needle and thread, and restitched the whole length of it, careful and even, and set it back exactly where she'd found it. He found it that evening. He stood with the case across both hands longer than the moment strictly required, and said nothing about it at supper, which, by then, she understood was exactly the shape his gratitude took. By the second month, the town's story about her had changed without anyone announcing it. She was seen at church, at the schoolhouse, at the general store, with her chin up and her boy's hand in hers, and people revised their opinions the slow, grudging way small towns always do, one sighting at a time. Never all at once. Silas Ward heard about it from 2 towns over. From a drover passing through, who mentioned, without meaning much by it, that Daniel Cole had been buying ribbon and peppermint candy in town, not the kind of purchases a man made only for himself. Silas had never been a man who could stomach another man holding the better version of a story he'd started. That, more than any change of heart, was what put him back on a horse. He found them coming off the schoolhouse steps on a Saturday, Clara with Sam's hand in hers, Daniel a step behind carrying a parcel he hadn't been asked to carry. Silas dismounted, hat in hand, voice arranged into something reasonable. "Clara, I was hasty at the depot. A man's allowed to be surprised." "You were clear," Clara said, "in front of the whole platform. I've had time to think it over. Our arrangement doesn't have to end there." His eyes flicked to Sam. "The boy could still say whatever you're going to say to her," Daniel said. Quiet, not moving, not around him. Silas's reasonable voice cost him more with every word. "I'm willing to put this right, Clara. You already said what you thought of us," she said. "I heard it the first time. I don't need to hear it twice to know it's still true underneath the second version." Silas looked at the boardwalk, at the faces that had gathered the way faces always gathered for this kind of thing. He looked at Daniel, who hadn't moved and didn't need to. He looked at Clara one last time, searching for the answer his expression had expected to find. It wasn't there. It wasn't coming. He put his hat on, mounted and rode out, and the street settled into the particular quiet that follows when the right thing has finally been said out loud. Daniel looked at Clara. Whatever she'd been holding together since the depot platform had gone somewhere else, what was underneath was quieter, and it looked like it intended to stay. "You didn't need me for that," he said. "No," she said, "but I'm glad you were there anyway." He shifted the parcel to one arm. "Come home," he said, not dressed up for the occasion, just a plain word set down in front of her like it already had her name on it. She took his arm instead of the parcel, and Sam ran ahead toward the horses, and the 3 of them walked back up the road together while the town, for once, had nothing left worth whispering about. The preacher came the following month. The ranch didn't change much after that, because it hadn't needed to. The coffee was already made for 2 before either of them had decided to call it that. The mismatched chairs stayed mismatched. Sam grew up knowing exactly which hinge in the house had been fixed without being asked, and which songs got played on evenings when the quiet needed somewhere to go. And most Saturdays, if you rode past the coal ranch, you'd find a boy brushing down a horse that trusted him, a woman standing easy in a garden that was hers now in every way that mattered, and a quiet man on the porch step who'd once crossed a train platform for no better reason than that something wrong was happening in front of him and never once regretted it.